Go.
Today is National Agriculture Day, and to celebrate, we want to share with you the book today, Full of Beans. Henry Ford Grows a Car. Henry Ford made cars, millions of cars, but this story isn't about cars. Well, maybe just one. It's about one car and a lot of beans. Henry had a mind for machines and was driven to improve the world around him. When he was young, his mother said, "Do something useful," and encouraged him to make life for others a little smoother, a little easier, and a little happier. Sometimes he was successful. He built a smoother ride in his affordable Model T, sort of. He sped up factories with the moving assembly line and made the workers happier with a $5 a day wage. Sometimes he was not. When he experimented with shrink proof wool, all he got was a drawer full of tiny socks. But one concern needled him his whole life: farming. Farming was hard work. No one knew that better than Henry. Growing up on a Michigan farm, he dreaded the long hours behind a horse and plow. From the time I left that front gate as a boy, my only interest in a farm had been to lighten its labors. If I can do that, I shall have rendered a real service to humanity. As a teenager, he hammered together a crude tractor, but it couldn't haul a hayseed. As a successful car manufacturer, Henry still experimented with building tractors from leftover car parts. One of these tractors, the Fordson, sold for more than 50 years. But heavy hauling and long hours of plowing was only part of the problem farmers faced. In 1929, the entire country suffered in the Great Depression. The stock market crashed, businesses failed, people couldn't find jobs. Some farmers lost their land. Others left crops rotting in the field because they couldn't afford to harvest. Henry remembered his mother's words, "Do something useful." What if farmers had a new market for their produce? They could earn more money and their crops wouldn't go to waste. Henry absolutely hated waste. Industry owes it to society to conserve material in every possible way. Henry recycled everything. The Ford factory in Dearborn, Michigan reused rags, boxes, and even sawdust. Every day, garbage trucks dumped 7 tons of trash at the factory where it was processed and turned into useful products: fuel for cars, material to pave roads, fertilizer for plants, and charcoal briquettes for grilling hot dogs. What if he used farmers' crops the same way? Anything that can be grown for industry's raw materials will bring new revenue to agriculture. But first, Henry had to figure out which vegetables were suitable. On a patch of land that he called Greenfield Village, Henry built a laboratory. He hired a team of young men to study the chemicals in every grain, fruit, and vegetable. One of those men was Robert Boyer. While ratchets and widgets cranked and spun in Henry's brain, Robert thought about chemicals and atoms that could be pulled apart and mixed together. Soon truckloads of vegetables tumbled in a heap outside the lab. Carrots one week, corn stalks the next, turnips, tomatoes, and wheat. Robert ground, whirled, boiled, and stirred. Henry rocked or did chin-ups on a beam. That was his way of thinking. After 2 years, they discovered the perfect crop for the factory: the soybean. People in China had grown and eaten soybean for centuries, but in the United States, soybean was cow feed. To Henry, it was a wonder crop. Soybeans were easy to grow, enriched the soil, and were bursting with oil and protein. Henry imagined farmers all across the country growing soybeans for food and for industry. But exactly what could they make from the oil and protein of the little lagoon? To work that out, Henry needed lots and lots of soybeans. In the spring of 1932, a fleet of Ford tractors planted 300 different kinds of soybeans across 8,000 acres. Soon the city of Dearborn sat in a sea of soybeans. In the fall, Robert ground, whirled, boiled, and stirred. Henry continued to think. Mixing soybean oil with coloring and other ingredients created a paint that was glossier, less expensive, and dried to a harder finish than the other coatings did. From a hospital bed where he was recovering from surgery, Henry announced that every Ford car would wear soybean paint. That came as a surprise to Robert, who had to hurry to perfect the paint for production. Next, Henry's team mixed soy protein with a chemical rosin to make a hard plastic. Soon cars rolled off the assembly line gleaming with soybean paint: horn buttons, gear shift knobs, light switches, and distributor caps. The more cars Henry built, the more soybeans he needed. Henry kept a network of 700 Michigan farmers busy growing more than 22,000 acres of soybeans. Some people thought Henry was full of beans, and he was. He ate beans. One of his favorite snacks was the Model T, a soybean cracker cut from the dough using a real Model T hubcap. Henry sold soy flour to factory workers and served soy ice cream in the lunchroom. He wore beans. Robert spun soy protein into thread, woven into fabric. It was nearly as strong as wood. Henry's tailor stitched him a soybean suit, and the men from the lab gave him a soybean silk tie. And Henry wanted to drive beans. Every Ford car already contained a bushel of soybeans, from the gear shift knob to the paint. But Henry wanted the cars even beanier. He imagined an automobile as revolutionary as his Model T. A whole car made out of soybean plastic, so lightweight it would use less gas than any other car on the road. Making small plastic parts was easy. Molding giant plastic panels was not. When the first panel popped out of the mold, Henry grabbed his axe. Aiming the blunt end, he swung. Crack! He punched a hole clear through. To test the strength of the next panel, Henry jumped up and down on it. If that was steel, he said, it was caved in. Henry attached a plastic trunk lid to his own car. With a crowd of people watching, Henry opened the trunk and pulled out his axe. He swung as hard as his wiry frame would allow. This time the axe bounced off the plastic and over his shoulder. It was time to assemble the car. Henry's team affixed the plastic panels onto a tubular steel frame. 2 fenders in the front, 2 in the rear, a front grille, the engine hood, the doors, and a roof. 14 plastic panels in all. No one had seen anything like it. The men in the Ford plant called it a monstrosity, just an old man's hobby. Henry knew it was much more. It wasn't just a car, it was the perfect symbol for how farms could fuel factories. On August the 13th, 1941, everyone gathered for the Dearborn Day festivities. Dressed in his soybean suit, Henry rode to the fairgrounds in his sleek new automobile, the color of wax bean. Some folks joked that the car ran on salad dressing rather than gas. Others saw Henry's revolutionary vision. "Please hurry it," one reporter wrote. "Mr. Ford, hurry, hurry." But 4 months later, no one was talking about Henry's amazing soybean plastic car. On December 7th, the Japanese Navy attacked Pearl Harbor, and America was at war. The Ford Motor Company stopped making cars and began building bomber planes. The soybean plastic car rolled into storage. Nobody knows for sure, but its steel frame may have been recycled for the war effort. The plastic panels disappeared. It would be one of Henry's last innovations. He died on April 7th, 1947. Henry will always be remembered for making cars, millions of cars, but only one proved that Henry was not full of beans. Today, soybean farmers continue to fuel factories, growing furniture and flooring, dog biscuits and bread, candy, crayons, and cars.